Agent Park spun around at the sound of the gunshot behind him, immediately recognizing the threat that Captain Williams represented. His years of federal training had taught him to trust his instincts, and seeing a local officer with a drawn weapon positioned behind his team during an active firefight triggered every alarm in his tactical awareness. The metal flashing that had struck Captain Williams lay on the ground beside her, and Agent Park's sharp eyes immediately traced its trajectory back to the rooftop where Marcus was positioned. In that instant, Agent Park understood that someone on that roof had just saved his life by alerting him to the betrayal within his own support structure. With Captain Williams neutralized and the insider threat exposed, Agent Park was able to refocus his team's efforts on the actual hostage situation. He quickly radioed for backup and medical support, while repositioning his agents to account for the new tactical reality. The firefight continued, but now the federal team had a clearer picture of who they could trust and who represented a genuine threat. Marcus remained on the rooftop, continuing to observe and document the situation as it unfolded. He watched as additional federal agents arrived, establishing a proper perimeter and bringing specialized equipment designed for hostage rescue operations. The professional efficiency of their response was impressive, and Marcus felt relieved that the situation was finally in truly capable hands. The resolution came faster than anyone expected. With their insider help compromised and their element of surprise lost, the captors inside the convention center found themselves outmatched by superior numbers and tactics. Agent Park's team used flashbang grenades to disorient the captors before storming the building in a coordinated assault that overwhelmed the remaining resistance in minutes. Marcus watched from his rooftop position as the hostages were safely evacuated from the building. Ambassador Rodriguez was among the first to emerge, and despite her ordeal, she maintained the dignified composure that had made her an effective diplomatic representative. Dr. Mitchell and the other officials followed, all appearing shaken but unharmed by their experience. As the last of the captors were led away in handcuffs, Agent Park looked up toward the rooftop where Marcus had been positioned throughout the crisis. Their eyes met across the distance, and Agent Park raised his hand in a gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude. Marcus returned the gesture, understanding that no words were necessary between them. The aftermath brought investigators, reporters, and officials from multiple agencies who all wanted to understand exactly what had happened and how a construction worker with martial arts training had become a key figure in preventing an international incident. Marcus found himself giving the same account over and over. He had simply been trying to walk home from work when he stumbled into something much larger than himself. Agent Park personally thanked Marcus for his intervention, explaining that the thrown wrench and metal flashing had prevented what could have been a massacre of federal agents. The corrupt police officer had been feeding information to a terrorist cell with international connections, and without Marcus's intervention, their plan might have succeeded completely. In the weeks that followed, Marcus returned to his quiet life of construction work and martial arts training. The media attention faded, the investigators completed their reports, and life in the city returned to normal. But Marcus carried with him the knowledge that sometimes ordinary people find themselves in extraordinary situations, and that 15 years of disciplined training had prepared him for a moment he never could have anticipated. The black belt around his waist still looked the same as it had before that evening in the alley. But Marcus knew that it now represented something more than just technical skill and physical conditioning. It represented the willingness to act when action was needed, the courage to stand up for what was right, and the understanding that true martial arts mastery means protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Ambassador Rodriguez sent Marcus a personal letter thanking him for his intervention and courage. Dr. Mitchell invited him to attend a climate conference as an honored guest. Agent Park offered him a position with federal law enforcement, though Marcus politely declined, preferring to remain in his familiar world of construction and martial arts training. Marcus never sought recognition for what he had done that night. He returned to his routine of early morning training sessions and honest work, carrying with him the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when the moment came, his years of preparation had made a difference in the lives of people he had never met and might never see again. The big man stepped closer to Marcus, invading his personal space in a way that was clearly meant to intimidate. His voice was deep and carried an accent that Marcus couldn't quite place. When he spoke, it was with the authority of someone who was used to giving orders and having them followed without question. "You shouldn't be here," the man said, his eyes never leaving Marcus's face. "This area is restricted tonight. You need to turn around and walk away, right now." Marcus looked around the alley, confused. There were no signs indicating it was a restricted area, no official barriers, and these men weren't wearing any kind of uniform or identification. Something felt very wrong about the entire situation. His years of construction work had taught him to trust his gut instincts, and right now those instincts were screaming danger. "I'm just trying to get home," Marcus replied calmly. "This is a public alley. I use it every day after work." The man's expression darkened and Marcus could see his jaw muscles tighten. The other two men moved even closer, forming a tighter circle around him. Marcus noticed that one of them kept his right hand inside his jacket while the other was nervously cracking his knuckles. These were not the actions of legitimate security personnel. "Listen carefully," the big man continued, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper. "Important people are going to be walking through here very soon. People who don't like witnesses or complications. You being here could create problems for everyone involved." Marcus felt his martial arts training take over. His breathing became deeper and more controlled. His stance shifted almost imperceptibly to a more balanced position, and his awareness of his surroundings sharpened dramatically. He could hear every sound in the alley, the distant traffic, a cat moving through the garbage bins, even the subtle rustle of fabric as the men around him shifted their weight. That's when Marcus noticed something that made his blood run cold. Through the service entrance behind the men, he could see into the convention center. There were more people inside, and they were moving with urgent purpose. Some were carrying what looked like equipment cases, while others were speaking rapidly into phones. This wasn't normal security preparation. This looked like something much more serious. The realization hit Marcus like a lightning bolt. These men weren't trying to protect someone important. They were planning something harmful. The important people the man had mentioned weren't guests to be protected. They were targets. Marcus had stumbled into the middle of what appeared to be a planned attack or kidnapping. His mind raced as he tried to process this information. The convention center was hosting some kind of international conference. He had seen news reports about foreign dignitaries and government officials attending meetings there all week. If these men were planning something against those officials, Marcus couldn't just walk away and pretend he hadn't seen anything. The big man must have seen the understanding dawn in Marcus's eyes, because his entire demeanor changed instantly. The pretense of being official security disappeared, replaced by something much more threatening. He took another step forward, and Marcus could see that his hand was now moving toward his jacket. "You've seen too much," the man said quietly.
"That's unfortunate for you." Marcus knew he had seconds to make a decision that could determine not just his own fate, but potentially the lives of many innocent people. His martial arts training had always emphasized using violence only as a
last resort, but sometimes that last resort becomes the only option. The question was whether he could handle 3 armed men by himself, and whether he could do it quickly enough to prevent whatever they had planned. Time seemed to slow down as Marcus analyzed his situation. The big man's hand was now clearly reaching for a weapon, while the other two were positioning themselves to block any escape routes. Marcus had trained for situations like this, but always in the controlled environment of the dojo. This was real life, with real consequences, and there would be no second chances if he made a mistake. The first rule his master had taught him echoed in his mind. Control the distance. Control the fight. Marcus needed to act before all 3 men could draw their weapons simultaneously. His best chance was to take out the biggest threat first, the man directly in front of him who was clearly the leader of the group. In one fluid motion, Marcus stepped forward and slightly to the side, closing the distance between himself and the big man, while moving out of the direct line of attack from the others. His years of training had taught him that the most effective techniques were often the simplest ones executed with perfect timing and maximum power. The kick came from nowhere. Marcus's right leg snapped up in a devastating arc, his shin connecting with the side of the big man's head with a sound like a baseball bat hitting a watermelon. The man's eyes rolled back instantly and his massive body crumpled to the ground like a demolished building. The weapon he had been reaching for clattered harmlessly across the alley floor. The speed and precision of the attack shocked everyone, including Marcus himself. He had trained that particular kick thousands of times, but never had he executed it with such perfect form under real pressure. The big man who had seemed so intimidating just moments before was now completely unconscious on the dirty alley floor. For a split second, everyone froze. The remaining two men stared in disbelief at their fallen leader. They had clearly expected an easy intimidation, not a display of martial arts mastery that had dropped their most dangerous member in a single strike. Marcus could see the fear creep into their eyes as they reassessed the situation. But Marcus knew his advantage wouldn't last long. The element of surprise was gone, and now he was facing two men who were fully aware of his capabilities. He could see them both reaching for their weapons, and he realized he had to keep moving to maintain any chance of success. The man to his left was faster, and Marcus saw the glint of metal as a knife appeared in his hand. Marcus pivoted on his left foot and launched a sidekick that caught the man in the solar plexus, doubling him over and sending the knife flying. Before the man could recover, Marcus grabbed his shoulders and brought his knee up sharply, connecting with the man's face and sending him sprawling backward. The third man had managed to draw what looked like a small pistol, but his hands were shaking with adrenaline and fear. Marcus could see that the man was not a trained fighter. He was probably just muscle hired for intimidation, not someone prepared for actual combat. The weapon wavered uncertainly as the man tried to decide whether to shoot or run. Marcus didn't give him time to make that decision. He moved in a zigzag pattern, making himself a difficult target while closing the distance. When he was close enough, he grabbed the man's wrist and twisted sharply, using a joint lock technique that forced the man to drop the weapon. A quick elbow strike to the man's temple ended the fight decisively. The entire confrontation had lasted less than 30 seconds. 3 armed men lay unconscious in the alley, and Marcus stood among them breathing heavily but uninjured. His construction clothes were dirty, his knuckles were bleeding slightly, but he was alive and victorious. The black belt around his waist had proven its worth in the most dramatic way possible. But as Marcus looked down at the unconscious men, he realized that this was just the beginning. Whatever these men had been planning was still in motion, and there were more people involved. He could hear activity coming from inside the convention center, and he knew he had to act quickly to prevent whatever was about to happen. Marcus quickly searched the unconscious men for identification and additional weapons. What he found made his blood run cold. The big man carried a fake security badge that looked incredibly authentic, along with a detailed floor plan of the convention center marked with specific locations and timing notes. The other men had similar materials, including photographs of several people Marcus recognized from recent news reports. Among the photos was a picture of Ambassador Elena Rodriguez, a prominent diplomat who had been working on international peace negotiations. Another photo showed Dr. James Mitchell, a renowned scientist who had been speaking about climate change solutions at the conference. These weren't random targets. They were carefully selected individuals whose removal would have significant global impact. Marcus pulled out his phone to call the police, but realized he had no signal. The alley was in a dead zone, probably intentionally created by jamming equipment somewhere nearby. He looked toward the convention center and could see that the situation was becoming more urgent. Through the windows, he noticed that the normal lighting had been replaced by emergency lighting, and people were moving in organized patterns that suggested something was already happening inside. He needed to get closer to understand the full scope of the threat. Marcus carefully moved toward the service entrance the men had been guarding. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear voices and movement from inside. As he peered through the gap, he saw a sight that confirmed his worst fears. The convention center's main hall had been taken over by a group of at least a dozen men, all dressed as maintenance workers and security personnel. They had positioned themselves strategically throughout the building, and Marcus could see that they were all armed and coordinated. This was a highly planned operation, not some random act of violence. In the center of the hall, several people in expensive suits were being held against their will. Marcus recognized Ambassador Rodriguez immediately. She was sitting in a chair with her hands bound, but her expression showed defiance rather than fear. Near her were other officials Marcus had seen on the news, all looking like they were trying to remain calm despite the obvious danger they were in. The leader of the group inside was speaking into a radio. giving orders in a language Marcus didn't understand. But the man's body language and the way the others responded to him made it clear that this was a military-style operation. These weren't common criminals, they were professionals with a specific agenda and the training to carry it. Marcus realized that the 3 men he had defeated in the alley were just the outer perimeter security. The real operation was much larger and more sophisticated than he had initially understood. He was witnessing what appeared to be an international incident that could have serious consequences for global politics and security. As he watched, Marcus saw something that made his decision for him. One of the captors was setting up what looked like camera equipment, while another was preparing what appeared to be a statement or list of demands. This wasn't just a kidnapping. It was going to be broadcast to the world, probably as some kind of political statement or ransom demand. Marcus knew he couldn't handle this alone, but he also knew that help might not arrive in time. The local police would be overwhelmed by an operation of this scale, and by the time federal authorities could respond, it might be too late for the hostages. He had to find a way to disrupt their plans and give the authorities a chance to respond effectively. Looking around the area, Marcus spotted something that gave him an idea. The convention center's fire alarm system had a manual activation point near the service entrance. If he could trigger a full building evacuation, it would force the captors to either abandon their plan or reveal themselves to the hundreds of people who would be flooding out of the building, but triggering the alarm would also expose his own position and make him a target for the remaining members of the group. Marcus would be going from a hidden observer to an active participant in a dangerous international incident. The martial arts skills that had served him well against 3 men in an alley would be tested against a much larger and better equipped force. Marcus made his decision. He couldn't stand by and watch innocent people become victims of whatever these men had planned. Moving quietly to the fire alarm, he took a deep breath and pulled the handle with all his strength. The piercing sound of the alarm filled the entire building instantly, echoing off the walls and creating chaos exactly as he had hoped. The reaction inside the convention center was immediate and dramatic. The captors, who had been calmly setting up their equipment, suddenly found themselves dealing with an unexpected crisis. Emergency lighting kicked in throughout the building, and automated announcements began directing people to evacuate through the nearest exits. Marcus could hear shouting and confusion as the carefully planned operation began to fall apart. Through the service entrance, Marcus watched as the leader of the group barked orders into his radio, trying to regain control of the situation. Some of his men were positioned to prevent the hostages from escaping, while others moved toward the exits to assess the threat. The leader's face was filled with rage as he realized that someone had deliberately disrupted their operation. Within minutes, people began streaming out of other parts of the convention center. Conference attendees, staff members, and legitimate security personnel all mixed together in the evacuation, creating exactly the kind of chaos Marcus had hoped for. The captors could no longer operate in secret. They were now exposed to hundreds of potential witnesses. But Marcus's plan had an unexpected consequence. As people evacuated through the main exits, several of the captors moved to intercept them, apparently trying to identify who had triggered the alarm. Marcus realized that innocent people were now at risk of being caught in the crossfire of whatever confrontation was about to occur. That's when Marcus saw something that changed everything. Among the people evacuating the building, he recognized someone who definitely shouldn't have been there. It was Captain Sarah Williams, a local police officer he knew from his neighborhood. But she wasn't in uniform, and she was moving with the same purposeful coordination as the captors. The shocking realization hit Marcus like a physical blow. This operation had inside help from law enforcement. That explained how the captors had been able to get into the building so easily, how they had known exactly where to find their targets, and why no legitimate security had responded to stop them. Some of the people who were supposed to protect the hostages were actually working with their captors. Marcus understood now why calling the regular police might not be enough. If there were corrupt officers involved, a normal emergency response could actually make the situation worse. He needed to find a way to identify who could be trusted and who was working with the captors. As he watched the evacuation continue, Marcus noticed that Captain Williams was using hand signals to communicate with the leader inside the building. She was reporting on the evacuation progress and apparently trying to identify the source of the alarm activation, It wouldn't be long before they figured out that someone had deliberately interfered with their operation. Marcus knew he had bought some time, but not much. The captors would adapt to the new situation, and they still had their hostages. The fire alarm had created confusion, but it hadn't actually solved the fundamental problem. If anything, it had made his own position more dangerous because now they knew someone was actively working against them. Looking around desperately for options, Marcus spotted a maintenance ladder that led to the roof of an adjacent building. From there, he might be able to get a better view of the entire situation and find a way to contact federal authorities directly, bypassing the potentially compromised local police entirely. As Marcus started climbing the ladder, he could hear vehicles arriving outside the convention center. But instead of the sirens he expected from emergency responders, he heard the quiet engines of more black vehicles. Additional personnel were arriving, and Marcus had a sinking feeling that these weren't the good guys coming to help. The operation was expanding, not being shut down. From his position on the ladder, Marcus could see that the situation was becoming much more complex than a simple rescue scenario. Multiple groups were now involved. The area was becoming a battlefield, and he was right in the middle of it all. The simple martial artist who had just wanted to walk home from work was now a key player in what appeared to be an international crisis. From the rooftop, Marcus had a clear view of the entire situation unfolding below. What he saw made him realize the true scope of what was happening. The black vehicles that had arrived weren't bringing more captors. They were bringing federal agents. Real ones this time, with proper identification and coordinated tactics that looked nothing like the group inside the building. Agent David Park, leading the federal response team, was setting up a command post across the street from the convention center. Marcus could see him coordinating with genuine security personnel, establishing communication lines and deploying his team in professional formations. These were the people who could actually resolve the crisis. But they didn't know about the corrupt local officer or the full extent of the insider involvement. Marcus realized he possessed critical information that could make the difference between a successful rescue and a disaster. He knew which local officer was compromised. He had seen the layout of the captors' positions, and he had disrupted their timeline by triggering the alarm. But he was stuck on a rooftop with no way to communicate this information to the people who needed it most. Using his phone's camera, Marcus began documenting everything he could see. He took photos of Captain Williams coordinating with the captors, pictures of the hostages' location within the building, and images showing the captors' positions and equipment. Even if he couldn't communicate directly with the federal agents immediately, he could gather evidence that would be crucial later. As Marcus watched, he saw Agent Park's team beginning to surround the building. Their tactics were professional and careful, designed to contain the situation without escalating it unnecessarily. But Marcus could see that they were walking into a trap. Captain Williams was feeding them information that would position them exactly where the captors wanted them. The situation reached a critical point when Marcus saw Captain Williams approaching Agent Park with what appeared to be building blueprints and tactical information. She was presenting herself as a helpful local resource, exactly the kind of insider assistance federal agents would naturally welcome and trust. Marcus knew that if Agent Park accepted her guidance, his entire team could be walking into an ambush. Marcus made a desperate decision. Using his belt as a makeshift sling, he launched one of his work tools toward the federal command post, aiming for the area near Agent Park's feet. The metal wrench struck the pavement with a loud clang and clattered across the asphalt, immediately drawing the attention of every federal agent in the area. Agent Park's training kicked in instantly. Instead of dismissing the thrown object as debris, he treated it as a potential threat and ordered his team to take defensive positions. This reaction probably saved several lives because at that exact moment, Marcus saw muzzle flashes from windows in the convention center. The captors had indeed been preparing an ambush, and it had been triggered prematurely by Agent Park's cautious response to the thrown wrench. The sound of gunfire changed everything. What had been a tense standoff suddenly became an active firefight. Agent Park's team returned fire while taking cover, their professional training evident in their coordinated response. But Marcus could see that they were still at a disadvantage because they didn't know about Captain Williams' betrayal. Marcus watched in horror as Captain Williams began moving toward Agent Park's position during the firefight, her weapon drawn. From Marcus's elevated position, It was clear that she intended to eliminate the federal team leader during the chaos of the gun battle. Agent Park was focused on the threat from the building and had no idea that danger was approaching from behind. There was no time for Marcus to climb down from the roof, no way to shout a warning that would be heard over the gunfire, and no method of communication that would reach Agent Park in time. Marcus realized that his martial arts skills, which had served him so well in the alley, were useless at this distance and elevation. But Marcus had spent years working construction, and construction workers learn to be resourceful with whatever tools and materials are available. Looking around the rooftop, he found exactly what he needed: a pile of roofing materials that had been left behind by maintenance workers. Among them were several heavy pieces of metal flashing that would work perfectly for his desperate plan. Taking careful aim, Marcus threw the metal flashing like a discus, using all the strength and precision his martial arts training had given him. The metal spun through the air in a perfect arc, covering the distance between the rooftop and the street below with remarkable accuracy. It struck Captain Williams in the shoulder just as she was taking aim at Agent Park, spinning her around and causing her shot to go wild. Agent Park spun around at the sound of the gunshot behind him, immediately recognizing the threat that Captain Williams represented. His years of federal training had taught him to trust his instincts, and seeing a local officer with a drawn weapon positioned behind his team during an active firefight triggered every alarm in his tactical awareness. The metal flashing that had struck Captain Williams lay on the ground beside her, and Agent Park's sharp eyes immediately traced its trajectory back to the rooftop where Marcus was positioned. In that instant, Agent Park understood that someone on that roof had just saved his life by alerting him to the betrayal within his own support structure. With Captain Williams neutralized and the insider threat exposed, Agent Park was able to refocus his team's efforts on the actual hostage situation. He quickly radioed for backup and medical support, while repositioning his agents to account for the new tactical reality. The firefight continued, but now the federal team had a clearer picture of who they could trust and who represented a genuine threat. Marcus remained on the rooftop, continuing to observe and document the situation as it unfolded. He watched as additional federal agents arrived, establishing a proper perimeter and bringing specialized equipment designed for hostage rescue operations. The professional efficiency of their response was impressive, and Marcus felt relieved that the situation was finally in truly capable hands. The resolution came faster than anyone expected. With their insider help compromised and their element of surprise lost, the captors inside the convention center found themselves outmatched by superior numbers and tactics. Agent Park's team used flashbang grenades to disorient the captors before storming the building in a coordinated assault that overwhelmed the remaining resistance in minutes. Marcus watched from his rooftop position as the hostages were safely evacuated from the building. Ambassador Rodriguez was among the first to emerge, and despite her ordeal, she maintained the dignified composure that had made her an effective diplomatic representative. Dr. Mitchell and the other officials followed, all appearing shaken but unharmed by their experience. As the last of the captors were led away in handcuffs, Agent Park looked up toward the rooftop where Marcus had been positioned throughout the crisis. Their eyes met across the distance, and Agent Park raised his hand in a gesture of acknowledgement and gratitude. Marcus returned the gesture, understanding that no words were necessary between them. The aftermath brought investigators, reporters, and officials from multiple agencies who all wanted to understand exactly what had happened and how a construction worker with martial arts training had become a key figure in preventing an international incident. Marcus found himself giving the same account over and over. He had simply been trying to walk home from work when he stumbled into something much larger than himself. Agent Park personally thanked Marcus for his intervention, explaining that the thrown wrench and metal flashing had prevented what could have been a massacre of federal agents. The corrupt police officer had been feeding information to a terrorist cell with international connections. And without Marcus's intervention, their plan might have succeeded completely. In the weeks that followed, Marcus returned to his quiet life of construction work and martial arts training. The media attention faded, the investigators completed their reports, and life in the city returned to normal. But Marcus carried with him the knowledge that sometimes ordinary people find themselves in extraordinary situations, and that 15 years of disciplined training had prepared him for a moment he never could have anticipated. The black belt around his waist still looked the same as it had before that evening in the alley. But Marcus knew that it now represented something more than just technical skill and physical conditioning. It represented the willingness to act when action was needed, the courage to stand up for what was right, and the understanding that true martial arts mastery means protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Ambassador Rodriguez sent Marcus a personal letter thanking him for his intervention and courage. Dr. Mitchell invited him to attend a climate conference as an honored guest. Agent Park offered him a position with federal law enforcement, though Marcus politely declined, preferring to remain in his familiar world of construction and martial arts training. Marcus never sought recognition for what he had done that night. He returned to his routine of early morning training sessions and honest work, carrying with him the quiet satisfaction of knowing that when the moment came, his years of preparation had made a difference in the lives of people he had never met and might never see again.